The surgeon who fought to keep his patient from being buried alive. We often think of the past as a simpler time, but in the heart of Victorian London, the simple act of survival was a brutal, terrifying gamble. In a world with no anaesthesia, no antibiotics, and no hope, one man's reputation was built on a single, terrifying virtue: speed. This is the story of Dr. Robert Liston, a man celebrated not for his compassion, but for his breathtaking ability to operate with the speed of a butcher and the precision of a watchmaker. He was the fastest knife in London, a blur of motion in a blood-soaked amphitheatre. The audience, packed shoulder to shoulder, didn't come to see a miracle. They came to see a horror that was over in minutes, a spectacle that was, in its own gruesome way, a gift. But our story isn't about Liston's speed. It's about a moment when his greatest talent was useless. It's a moment when the pace of life itself slowed to a crawl, and he was forced to fight a far more insidious enemy than disease, the chilling finality of death. Our tale begins not in a clean, sterile operating room, but in the fetid slums of 1840s London. Dr. Robert Liston was a man who lived up to his reputation. At 6 feet 2 inches, with a stern face and a fiery temper, he was a force of nature. He was known to toss his scalpel at assistants who fumbled a tool and curse with a venom that made strong men tremble. He had a particular disdain for carelessness, and he saw it all around him. The medical profession in his day was a chaotic mess. Surgeons were little more than barbers with sharper knives. Operations were public spectacles, a form of gruesome entertainment. Patients, often screaming and struggling against the leather restraints, were held down by burly orderlies as the surgeon worked feverishly against the clock, knowing every extra second meant unimaginable pain. Liston, however, was different. He was a master craftsman. He could perform a leg amputation in less than 2.5 minutes, a feat that drew crowds from across the city. His most famous case, the subject of whispered legends, involved a man with a tumour on his neck. Liston was so fast that he cut off the patient's tonsils with the tumour, and the patient was so grateful he wrote him a letter. He was the best there was, but he was still just a man, and no man, no matter how fast, could outrun the Grim Reaper. The event that would define the rest of Liston's life took place not in an operating theatre, but in the quiet, unassuming home of a wealthy merchant. Mr. Alistair Finch was a man who lived a life of excess, a man who, after a particularly lavish dinner party, suddenly collapsed in his parlour. His distraught wife, frantic with worry, summoned every doctor in the city, but it was Liston who arrived first, his carriage clattering to a halt outside the home as the rain began to fall in earnest. When Liston entered the room, he saw a body on the floor. It was a ghastly sight. The man was still, cold to the touch. The other doctors who had arrived were already whispering the grim diagnosis: apoplexy, a stroke, a swift and certain death. They had seen it 100 times. They began to pronounce him dead. But Liston, ever the skeptic, refused to believe. He saw something no one else did, a flicker, a tremor, a ghost of a pulse. He pressed his ear to the man's chest and heard the faintest, most irregular heartbeat. "He's alive," Liston insisted, his voice sharp and confident. The other doctors scoffed. They told him it was the mere muscle spasm of a dying body, the last pathetic gasp of a failing heart. They told him to leave, to let the man die in peace. But Liston was not a man to be told anything. He was a man who acted. He ordered a basin of hot water, a tub of ice, and began a desperate improvised ritual. He plunged the man's hands and feet into the scalding water, then into the ice. He massaged the man's chest, pounding rhythmically, desperately. The other doctors watched in disbelief, their disbelief turning to anger. They told him he was torturing a corpse, that he was a madman, that he would ruin their reputations and his own. But Liston kept going. He had a patient to save, and the clock was ticking. A day passed, and the man still lay comatose. The initial flicker of life had faded. The other doctors had left, shaking their heads in disgust. They had a funeral to plan. The undertaker, a grim-faced man with a tape measure, had already arrived and was discussing coffin sizes with the sobbing wife. Liston was alone with his patient. He sat by the bedside, refusing to leave, refusing to let his vigil end. He felt the cold air of the room, the suffocating presence of death, and he knew he was fighting a losing battle. He had seen thousands of people die in his lifetime. He knew what a dead body looked and felt like, but this one was different. He felt a connection, a desperate silent plea from the man on the bed to keep him from the ground. The wife pleaded with him. "Please, doctor," she cried, "let him go. You've done all you can. Let him rest." "He is not ready to rest," Liston thundered. "He is not dead." The conflict was now out in the open. Liston's reputation was on the line. He had always been a renegade, a man who scoffed at convention. But now he was fighting the most powerful force in the world, the finality of death and the fear that comes with it. He was a man standing alone against a tide of grief, skepticism, and centuries of tradition. He knew he had to act. He had to prove he was right. He had to prove that the man was alive. He came up with an audacious, terrifying plan. He would do something that no surgeon in his right mind would ever do. He would cut the patient just a small incision to see if he bled. The scene that followed was not for the faint of heart. Liston, with the family looking on in horror, sterilized a small scalpel. He stood over the man's still body. He made a small, clean incision on the patient's arm, and then he waited. Nothing. Not a drop of blood. The wife screamed, "You've killed him! You've killed him, you monster!" Liston's heart sank. He had failed. He had lost the fight. He had been so sure, so certain. But now he had nothing. He had just desecrated a corpse. His career, his reputation, everything he had worked for was gone. The whispers would become roars. The man who was too fast had finally failed. The undertaker stepped forward, a grim look on his face. "It's time, doctor," he said, his voice as cold as the corpse. "The coffin is ready." Liston, defeated, stepped back from the bed. He watched as the undertaker's men came into the room with a coffin. They prepared to lift the body and carry it away to its final dark resting place. And then, just as they were about to lift the body, the man on the bed gasped. A long, shuddering breath, a sound that was at once terrifying and beautiful. His eyes fluttered open. He looked up at the ceiling, confused, and then at Liston, who was standing over him, his face a mixture of shock and relief. What is going on?" the man whispered. He had returned. He had come back from the edge of the grave. The aftermath of this event was both a triumph and a tragedy. The man, Alistair Finch, went on to live another 15 years, a testament to Liston's unwavering belief and persistence. The story became a legend, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of times hope could emerge. But the real story is in the details, in the man's return to a world that had already given him up for dead. He never fully understood what had happened to him, but he was eternally grateful to the doctor who had saved him. The story of the surgeon who fought to keep his patient from being buried alive is a powerful reminder that even when the odds are stacked against you and the world has given up on you, there is still hope. It's a story about a man who, in a profession defined by brutal speed, found a moment to slow down and listen to the faintest whisper of a life that was about to be extinguished. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of medicine is not what you do, but what you refuse to do.